Her son cruised past her in the snow while his dog rode in heated comfort. Marge Klein, waiting at the bus stop, clutched a key he forgot she still owned. The Buick was hers, legally, quietly. By Friday, it would be towed from mid-traffic, with cameras rolling and the title notarized. He thought she was just the ride. He forgot she was the owner. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The wind cut sharper than usual that morning, curling around Marge's scarf and sliding down the collar of her wool coat like ice water. She stood stiffly at the corner of Glenmore and Dutch Mill, where the sidewalk dipped unevenly, and the city bus ran so rarely it felt more rumor than transit. Her gloved hands clutched the metal bench behind her, the steel so cold it bit through the fabric. Cars passed in slow procession, tires slicing through dirty slush. Marge shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to shake warmth into her toes. She glanced at her watch. 5 minutes late. Then came the unmistakable thrum of Troy's SUV engine, a deep, smug purr, polished to perfection. Her son's black Escalade slid past the corner like it belonged in a dealership ad, salt-free and spotless despite the snow. Inside, she saw the familiar tuft of golden fur first. Baxter was sitting upright in the back seat, wearing a little puffer vest and perched on a quilted pad glowing orange with built-in heating coils. His head bobbed slightly with the motion of the car, tongue lolling, unaware or uncaring of anything outside his glass cocoon. Troy didn't even look her way. Eyes forward, Bluetooth earpiece flashing blue. He was mouthing something, probably talking real estate or refinancing or whatever he always called providing. The SUV's turn signal clicked twice, and it glided smoothly onto the on-ramp, disappearing. Marge blinked once, twice. Then she laughed. Not a full laugh, but the kind that slips out when pain runs too close to absurd. The bus arrived 6 minutes later, groaning as it pulled up with a hiss of air brakes and a cloud of exhaust. She climbed aboard, handed over her pass, and chose the seat furthest from the door. A patch of wet from a previous rider seeped through her coat as she sat. She said nothing. The pharmacy was a half-mile walk from the last stop. Marge trudged down the shoulder, boots crunching through frozen sludge, her knees complaining with every step. She picked up her prescriptions, the cholesterol one that made her lightheaded, and the arthritis one that didn't work much but kept her moving, then made the same walk back in reverse. By the time she got home, her fingers ached from gripping the bag, and her coat smelled faintly of diesel. That evening, she sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea gone lukewarm. Her ancient laptop, slow but loyal, rested open in front of her. She clicked through notifications with tired eyes, not expecting anything but discount offers and chain emails. Then came Lindsay's post, a photo, their living room glowing warm in amber light. Baxter curled on a throw blanket by the fireplace. Lindsay in athleisure, smiling with a wine glass. Troy in his usual half-sincere pose, arm over his wife's shoulders, one finger still pointing at something off-frame like he was giving a TED Talk even at home. The caption, "Grateful for warmth and family." Marge didn't hit the like button. She didn't comment. Instead, she stood up slowly, knees cracking, and walked over to the front closet. Behind her old boots and the faded rain poncho, she reached up and pulled down the box she hadn't opened since last spring. Inside, a soft rattle. Keys. Her hand dug past a cracked flashlight and an old flashlight battery until her fingers closed around a key ring. Most were tarnished, some already retired. But one key, thick, square cut, still labeled with a worn dealership tag, gleamed faintly under the hallway light. She turned it over in her palm, the weight of it strangely comforting. Through her frosted living room window, she could just make out the faint blue glow of streetlights reflecting off snow-covered driveways. Her old sedan, the silver Buick, sat parked at the edge of Troy's house, visible from her vantage point even now. Unused, forgotten, legally untransferred. Her car? Marge didn't smile. She didn't need to. She just slipped the single key into her pocket, sat back down at the laptop, and opened a new tab. DMV Vehicle Title Transfer, Ohio. As the page loaded, her tea finally went cold, and outside, the temperature was still falling. The linoleum floor at the Boudinot DMV had a perpetual grayness to it, like something scrubbed too often and never quite clean. The overhead fluorescents hummed with the kind of institutional indifference that made time stretch and nerves fray. Marge sat quietly in the molded plastic chair, the paper ticket in her gloved hand curling slightly at the edges. C312. The screen still blinked, C306. Around her, a handful of others waited. A teenager slumped over his phone, a mother balancing a toddler and a diaper bag, a man flipping through a manila folder with the kind of desperation that meant he'd already been turned away once today. Marge, for her part, had come prepared. The file folder in her purse held a copy of the vehicle registration, old insurance paperwork, and, most crucially, a copy of the original title. Not a photocopy. The real one, folded neatly, signed only on her end. Never transferred, never notarized. She hadn't looked at it in nearly 4 years. Seeing it again that morning had stirred something brittle but stubborn in her. The screen blinked. C312. Window 4. She rose slowly, her hips tight from the cold, and crossed to the counter. A plexiglass barrier separated her from the woman on the other side, short bob haircut, cranberry lipstick, reading glasses chained around her neck like armor. Her name tag read, Stacy Fairbanks. "Morning," Stacy said without glancing up, fingers already flying across the keyboard. "What can I help you with?" "I need to check the title status on a vehicle," Marge said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. "It's a 2016 Buick LaCrosse. I have the plate number and VIN." Stacy glanced up now, just briefly, but something in Marge's tone must have signaled that this wasn't just a routine request. She slid a form across. "Start with that," she said. "I'll pull up the record." Marge filled in the lines carefully, her pen scratching softly across the paper. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. After a few moments, Stacy leaned closer to her monitor and squinted. "Looks like the title's still in your name," she said. Marge didn't flinch. "Insurance is under my son's name, though. Correct?" "Yep," Stacy confirmed. "He added it to his policy, but he never filed a formal transfer, which means, technically, you're still the legal owner." Marge's breath left her chest in a slow, controlled exhale. Stacy kept scrolling. "You also never released liability. That part's blank." "I assumed he'd file everything when he took it." Marge's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the counter. "He said he would." "Most people don't lie on these," Stacy said with a dry smile. "But they do forget. Or assume. Happens all the time." Marge didn't reply. Stacy looked back up. "Want to reclaim possession?" The question hovered between them, simple and seismic. Marge's lips pressed together before she answered. Not hesitation, calculation. "Just tell me what I need to do." Stacy nodded once, almost like she'd been waiting for that answer. She pulled a thin pink form from beneath the counter and began writing quickly. "You'll need this. A duplicate title request. There's a lien release section if needed, but since there's no lien holder listed, it's clean. Also need your ID, proof of residency, and a bill of sale or affidavit of ownership." "I can handle all that," Marge said. "Good," Stacy said, sliding a checklist over with practiced efficiency. "Bring it back here when it's filled out. We'll process it directly. No online runaround." There was something in her tone that made Marge look at her more closely. "You see a lot of this?" Marge asked. Stacy shrugged. "Not always with family, but yeah, women trying to untangle messes people left for them. Happens more than you'd think." Marge tucked the papers into her folder, her hands no longer shaking. "Well," she said softly, "some messes, you don't clean up. You reclaim them." She turned to leave. At the door, she passed a man yelling into his phone about having every damn document. A baby began to wail near the photo booth. Life, in all its noise, pressed in around her. But Marge moved through it like she had somewhere better to be. Outside, the sky was the color of salt and pavement, threatening snow again. She zipped up her coat, stepped into the cold, and didn't look back. The pink form peeked from the folder in her bag. Next stop, proof of ownership. The message came in at 3:18 p.m. on a Friday, just as Marge was setting a kettle on the stove. Troy. Dinner Sunday, 6 sharp, Lindsay's doing the roast. Can you Uber? Baxter gets carsick if his routine's off. No greeting, no question, just instructions. Marge stared at it for a long moment, the words his routine pulsing on her screen like a bruise. She could almost hear Troy's voice, slick, dismissive, already on to the next thing. The kettle began to whistle softly. She turned off the stove without touching the handle. Sunday arrived gray and mean, the kind of cold that tightened your skin and never quite let go. Marge stood at the curb and waited for her Uber, checking her coat pockets 3 times to make sure the envelope with her updated ID and the title form were still there, just in case. The driver, a young man with earbuds and too much cologne, said nothing as she got in. They passed her Buick along the way, still parked in Troy's drive, collecting more crusted snow around the tires. It looked more like a gravestone now than a car. She stepped into the Klein household at 6:03. Lindsay opened the door, wearing a floor-length cardigan and a brittle smile. "We started without you. Hope that's okay," she chirped. Behind her, Baxter barked once, then pranced in wearing socks. Actual socks. Marge towed off her boots and kept her coat on. Troy was already mid-sentence at the dining table, carving the roast with the showmanship of a man who assumed everyone around him was always listening. "I've just had to step up more, you know, for everyone's sake. Mom, you know how it is when the weight of the family lands on you." He didn't look at her as he said it, just poured himself another glass of Cabernet and passed the carving knife to Lindsay, who beamed like she was at a fundraiser and not her own dinner table. Marge took the smallest slice of meat and nothing else. She wasn't hungry. Nina slid a dish of carrots toward her, quietly, and that small act of care pierced deeper than anything Troy had said. "College apps going okay?" Marge asked gently. Nina nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Better now that I've stopped showing them to Dad first." Marge's gaze lingered on her, thoughtful. The corners of Nina's eyes were sharper now, growing into awareness, not just of the world, but of her parents. Dinner moved on, meandering through Troy's work updates and Lindsay's talk of redecorating. The latest obsession? Heated flooring for Baxter's new calming space off the mudroom. "It's just so worth it," Lindsay said, cradling her wineglass. "He's really sensitive to the cold, and it's not like we don't have the space." Marge looked down at her own hands resting on the table. One of her fingers had started to swell again, the arthritis flaring with the temperature drop. She pushed her chair back quietly and stood. "I'll help pack leftovers." In the kitchen, Nina handed her a foil-covered plate and whispered without looking up, "This is getting worse." Marge didn't answer. She simply touched Nina's elbow for a moment, the way her own mother used to when words didn't suffice. The Uber ride home was silent again. She didn't speak until she was alone, coat still on, standing in her kitchen with the foil plate untouched on the counter. She moved to her laptop and opened it with more certainty than she had days earlier. The DMV site loaded slowly. Her cursor hovered just a moment over the menu, then clicked. Bill of sale, private vehicle transfer. She chose the printable PDF version. Downloaded, opened, then she hit print. The whir of the old machine filled the room, loud and mechanical. Marge leaned against the counter, arms crossed as the first page slid out. Across the top, seller, Marjorie E. Klein. She didn't know who the buyer was yet. But the sale had already begun. The spare key lived in the second drawer of the sewing table, tucked inside an Altoids tin behind a tangle of thread spools and a half-used fabric measuring tape. Marge hadn't thought about it in years, not since Troy insisted he'd take over everything car-related and drove off in the Buick like he was doing her a favor. She popped the lid. Inside, the metal glinted like a secret, not a fob, just the mechanical key. Old school, solid. At 6:10 a.m. on a Sunday, Marge stood alone at the corner of her block, wrapped in a scarf and an oversized parka Ron had insisted she keep after her fall last winter. The bus stop was empty. Light hadn't cracked the horizon yet, and the only sound was the distant hiss of tires over salt. She didn't sit. She didn't shift her weight. She just waited, still, ready. The bus arrived 5 minutes early and nearly passed her, but she flagged it down with a practiced wave. The driver didn't speak, neither did she. She got off 2 blocks before Troy's cul-de-sac, walking the last stretch with her shoulders hunched and her eyes scanning the quiet. The neighborhood was still half asleep, windows dark, porches dusted in fresh snow. His house looked exactly the way it always did on Sunday mornings. Shades drawn, no motion, the yard light still glowing yellow. The Escalade sat in the drive, nose pointed out like a watchdog. But it wasn't running, and it wasn't locked. Marge stepped onto the driveway, boots crunching faintly. She slid the key from her pocket and slipped it into the driver's side door. It clicked open like it had never left her hand. The interior smelled like leather and dog treats. Baxter's padded mat was still laid out in the back, complete with a chew toy shaped like a squirrel. The front seat was adjusted far back, probably to fit Troy's ego. She reached for the glove box, tugged it open, and found the registration paperwork Troy had jammed in there haphazardly, wrinkled with coffee stains along one edge. Then she leaned down to the dashboard and read the VIN off the inside panel. 17 characters, still etched clean despite the frost. Out came her phone. Click. One shot of the VIN. Click. The registration beside it. Click. The odometer reading. Click. The license plate just before she closed the door. She didn't linger, just turned and walked 2 blocks back down the road, retracing her footsteps exactly until a red pickup truck idled near the corner. The passenger window rolled down. "You look like you're casing the place," Ron Levy said, voice low but amused. "Need a getaway car?" "Already got one," Marge replied, pulling the spare key from her pocket. "Just not today." He chuckled and leaned over to open the door. "Hop in." Ron's truck was cluttered, fast food napkins on the dash, a cracked bobblehead on the console, but warm, blessedly warm. She let the heat hit her face as he pulled into gear. They didn't talk much on the drive, didn't need to. Back at her house, the dining table was cleared off except for the packet of DMV forms and a black pen with good weight to it. Marge laid out the photos, VIN and registration in a neat row. The pink form she'd gotten from Stacy was already half filled. She opened the second page, Section C, Transfer of Title, and began writing slowly in her firmest hand. Ron pulled out his glasses and squinted at the paperwork. "You sure about this?" "I'm past sure," she said. He nodded. "All right then." He placed a lined notepad beside her. "We'll need a lien release too. I've got the language. You just sign it, and make sure you mark the mileage. They're picky about that." Together, they worked in quiet rhythm, Marge filling, Ron double-checking, both of them steady. The only sound was the scratch of pen on paper and the faint hum of her heater kicking back to life. Outside, the sky had turned bright, but the cold still hung in the air like unfinished business. Marge slid the documents into a manila envelope and smoothed her hand across it. The Buick might have been parked in Troy's driveway, but the title, the numbers, the proof, that now lived in hers. And across the room, the printer tray still held the bill of sale. Next page, buyer's name. Next step, possession, and she knew exactly where it would lead. Travis's office smelled faintly of coffee grounds and printer toner, the scent of long nights and airtight paperwork. Marge sat across from him, the manila envelope resting between them like a loaded weapon neither had to announce. "So," Travis said, adjusting his glasses, "you're ready to move this out of your name and into your control?" Marge didn't smile. "Into my trust." He nodded, already booting up his laptop. "We'll do it through an LLC, clean, boring name, one you own, one you manage, keeps it out of reach and on your terms." She slid the envelope forward. "VIN's in there, odometer reading, photos, title and lien release, signed." Travis's fingers moved fast, eyes scanning the screen. "I'll register the bill of sale between you and the LLC, file it electronically. We'll have the DMV acknowledgement by end of day." The words "by end of day" rang in her chest like a drumbeat. By the time she stepped out of his office, a soft flurry had begun dusting the sidewalks in downtown Cincinnati. She pulled her scarf tighter and reached into her pocket, her hand curled around the spare key like a fuse waiting for fire. Back home, Ron was already in her garage with the toolkit laid out and a compact black device no bigger than a deck of cards. "This is the one?" he asked, holding it up. It tracks location, speed, even idling time, she said. The good ones do. He gave a half smile. You've been reading. Reading, watching, remembering. The two of them moved with quiet efficiency, Ron sliding beneath the undercarriage of her Buick, Marge handing down the tools with surprising precision. In less than 20 minutes, the kill switch was wired, the app installed on her phone, the system armed. Ron wiped his hands on an old rag. You sure you want to go nuclear on this? Marge looked at him flatly. It's not nuclear if it's mine. That evening, she placed the final call. The voicemail picked up after 3 rings. Troy, don't use the Buick tomorrow. It's no longer covered by your insurance, and it's not yours to drive. Consider this your formal notice. I'm sure you'll have alternate arrangements. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't have to. The next morning dawned in a smear of gray sleet and school closings. Marge was already dressed and seated at her kitchen table, the phone in her palm, screen open to the tracking app. At 7:48 a.m., the little icon blinked to life. Troy had started the car. At 7:53, it moved. She watched it snake through the west side, Glenway Avenue to Queen City, then up the incline toward the financial district. No texts came, no calls. He either hadn't listened to her voicemail or, more likely, had listened and simply dismissed it. At 8:12, the GPS indicated a full stop at a red light just past 8th and Plum. Marge waited. One breath, then another. She tapped the icon marked Disable Engine. It asked for a PIN. She entered it. The screen blinked. Command sent. Vehicle immobilized. Her phone buzzed 2 minutes later. A location ping. The Buick was still at the light. Traffic around it had shifted. It hadn't moved. A second ping. Still there. At 8:18, her phone rang. Unknown number. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned forward and refreshed the map one more time. Still frozen. Right there in public. Right where he'd feel it. Surrounded by people on their way to jobs, appointments, lives. No tantrum would unlock the engine. No authority would override the transfer. The car now belonged to an entity Troy didn't even know existed. And legally, it had left his world without him even realizing. She opened the city traffic cam on her second browser tab. There it was, her Buick, hazards blinking, Troy standing outside of it in a camel coat, phone to his ear, disbelief hardening into something uglier. Behind him, honking. Beside him, shame. Marge sat back, the warm mug in her hand now cooled to room temperature. She smiled, just barely, not out of triumph, out of relief. Next move, the tow. By the time Marge stepped out of the cab, the Buick sat like a stalled monument in the middle of the intersection, hazard lights blinking with robotic indifference. Commuters had begun carving new lanes around it, some honking, some rolling windows down to throw curses into the cold morning air. The tow truck was already there, big, orange, unapologetic. Its hydraulic bed hissed as it lowered toward the icy pavement. The driver, a stocky woman with wind-burned cheeks and a cigarette tucked behind one ear, nodded when she saw Marge approaching. You Klein? Marge held up the envelope from her coat pocket. Title, release, bill of sale, all under the trust. Then it's yours, the driver said, reaching for her clipboard. Sign here and we'll clear it before someone tries to call the city. Marge's gloved fingers pressed the pen to paper, just as a familiar voice cut through the bitter air. What the hell do you think you're doing? Troy. He came charging across the street in that too expensive camel coat, hair tousled, tie askew, face red not from the cold, but from something louder. Lindsay trailed behind, coat half-zipped, phone in her hand like a shield. Her heeled boots skated on the ice, but she kept pace. Marge didn't move, didn't blink, just handed the clipboard back. You had no right, Troy barked, stepping between her and the tow operator. This is theft. You're losing it. You disabled a moving car. Marge calmly opened the envelope again and pulled out the printed title transfer, now stamped and notarized. The vehicle is owned by a trust I control. The registration reflects that. The kill switch was legally installed. I left you a warning not to drive it. She's bluffing, Lindsay said, tugging at Troy's arm. This has to be... A patrol cruiser pulled up behind the tow truck, its blue lights washing over the snow and slush in hypnotic pulses. A young officer stepped out, lips already parted to deliver a, "What seems to be the problem?" Troy pounced. "Officer, thank God, my mother is trying to steal my car. She shut it off remotely in the middle of the street. Look at this." He gestured wildly toward the Buick. "She's not well." The officer turned to Marge, patient but firm. "Ma'am, do you have documentation showing ownership of the vehicle?" Without a word, Marge held up the title and the LLC paperwork. Her hand was steady. The officer read in silence for a moment, brow furrowing. He looked at Troy. "Sir, this shows she is, in fact, the legal owner." "That's not possible," Troy snapped. "She gave me that car." "No," Marge said quietly. "I lent you that car, temporarily. Like a lot of things you assumed permanent." Lindsay stepped forward now, mascara already streaking. "This is all over a misunderstanding," she pleaded. "Can't we just talk this out like family?" Marge turned to her slowly. "It's not over a misunderstanding, it's over disrespect." For a beat, the world narrowed. No honking, no exhaust, just the frozen stillness of a truth laid bare in public. Across the sidewalk, near the corner where the bus shelter stood, Nina had appeared. She held her phone upright. Not hiding, not dramatic, just recording, calmly, precisely, like someone archiving reality for when people tried to rewrite it later. Troy saw her and flinched. "Turn that off." Nina didn't respond, just kept the phone steady. The tow driver hooked the car with a quick metallic clank. The hydraulics groaned, lifting the front wheels from the icy street. "Where do you want it dropped?" she asked Marge. "Ron Levy's garage," Marge replied. 2 miles west. He's expecting it." "Copy that." As the Buick rose slowly into the air, swaying slightly, Troy stood frozen. Lindsay had started to cry in earnest now, whispering something sharp behind her hand. Marge gave one last look at her son, not angry, not triumphant, just done. Then she turned to Nina, who lowered her phone and walked quietly over to her side. "Let's get out of the cold," Marge said. But in her pocket, her phone buzzed once. DMV. Title change successfully processed. New ownership confirmed. There'd be fallout, but the car wasn't the only thing that had been reclaimed. Ron's garage smelled like motor oil and time, a mix of rubber, steel, and memories soaked into concrete. The Buick sat beneath the lifted door, salt-stained and idling in the early afternoon light. Its presence felt different now. Not intrusive, not borrowed, just returned. Marge stood beside it, gloves on, sleeves pushed up past her wrists. A tarp had been rolled out under the vehicle, and an old shop vacuum rested nearby, already humming. Ron handed her a pair of latex gloves. "I didn't know dogs could shed this much." "He's a golden retriever with furniture-level access," Marge said, opening the rear passenger door. "I'm not surprised." The smell hit her first, a cocktail of wet fur, spilled kibble, and the faint musk of artificial lavender. She grimaced but said nothing, pulling the seat back forward. Hair clung to the upholstery in thick waves, woven into the fabric like stubborn history. The heated seat pad was still in place, corners curled up, one corner stained with something she chose not to examine too closely. Ron hauled out a duffel bag from the backseat floor, unzipped it, and began sifting. Dog jacket, shampoo, a receipt from Barkingham Inn? That a real place? "Pet hotel," Marge said dryly. "They used to say I couldn't come visit because Baxter had anxiety when his routine was disrupted." Ron let out a short laugh and shook his head. "World's upside down." Marge pulled out a torn shopping bag wedged behind the driver's seat. Inside were more receipts. $60 grooming charges, a monogrammed collar, even a dental cleaning invoice. At the bottom, crumpled but still legible, was one with her own signature. Oil change, $41.89. She stared at it for a beat before folding it and tucking it into her coat pocket. Ron leaned into the trunk, flashlight in one hand, and called out, "You stash anything back here you want to reclaim?" She joined him, brushing her hair back with her forearm. The trunk had been cleared, mostly. A blanket, a few old parking stubs, and... She froze. Her hand hovered over the spare tire compartment, then reached down and lifted it. The tire was there, fully inflated, but it wasn't what caught her attention. Still taped underneath, pressed flat against the metal, was a small envelope, yellowed and sealed with worn packing tape, her emergency cash stash, a habit from her late husband back when glove compartments were safer than banks. Ron whistled. "Well, would you look at that?" She peeled it free, hands trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside, 6 $20 bills, a few tens, and a folded note in her own handwriting. "If it ever comes to this, take the car, take your name, and don't look back." She didn't say a word, just slid the envelope into her coat and shut the trunk gently. Ron stood beside her now, wiping his hands on a rag. "You want me to shampoo the seats? I've got a steam vac that might get that smell out." "No," she said, staring into the back seat. "Leave it." He looked at her sideways. "You sure?" "Yeah." She stepped away from the car. "It's part of the record now." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Nina. "You okay?" Marge stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back. "Better now." Warmer, too. She slipped the phone away and picked up the DMV folder from the workbench. A new email had arrived earlier, official and concise. Subject, final confirmation, title, liability released, status, complete. It was done. No more exposure, no more risk. Every fine, every scratch, every bad parking decision that car absorbed while it sat in her son's care, now legally wiped from her name. Ron pulled the garage door halfway down to block the wind. So what now? Marge leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. "I keep cleaning," she said. Her gaze settled on the glove box. There were still names to cross out, and one name left to add. The living room was quiet, except for the soft shuffle of photo sleeves sliding against each other. Marge sat on the floor with a cardboard box between her knees, legs crossed, hands bare despite the chill that crept in from the old window frames. The afternoon sun painted long golden stripes across the carpet, warm but low. Winter light, temporary light. The photo albums had lived in the hall closet for years, moved, stacked, shifted, but rarely opened. Today, she was finally opening them. She started with the Christmases, the early ones, when Nina was small and still wore barrettes with plastic butterflies. Marge sat in the center of those photos, lap full of ribbon and laughter, Troy at her side, Lindsay smiling without calculation. Then came the slow fade. One year, Marge was on the end of the couch. The next, she was seated behind the group, almost hidden by a tall centerpiece. Then, in a photo labeled Christmas Eve, Troy's house, she was standing in the background holding a casserole and looking not at the camera but at an empty chair. She flipped the page. Her face was gone completely now, replaced by Baxter and a Santa hat on the hearthrug. Marge closed the album. In the silence, she pulled her phone from the coffee table and tapped through her settings. Authorized users, financial accounts. Troy Klein, remove. Lindsay Klein, remove. Confirm? Yes. A second tab. Healthcare proxy. Primary, Marjorie E. Klein. Secondary, Nina Klein, ADD. There. It was like cutting string. You didn't feel the snap until the line curled away from your hands. A knock broke the quiet. Nina stood on the porch in a zip-up hoodie, backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds dangling. She smiled when Marge opened the door, and the sight of her felt like oxygen. "I can't stay long," Nina said, stepping inside, "but I brought my scanner and snacks." They sat on the floor together, laptops and cords strewn across the rug. Nina worked fast. Birth certificates, insurance policies, deed copies, even the DMV letters. She labeled each file with quiet precision. "You don't have to do all this," Marge said, though not unkindly. "I want to," Nina said, not looking up. "Plus, your filing system is basically shoebox-based. This is necessary." Marge chuckled softly. Then, after a moment, "I looked through the photo albums." Nina stopped feeding a document. "Yeah?" "I used to be in the middle," Marge said, voice low. "Then I was off to the side. Then gone." Nina didn't offer comfort, didn't deflect. She simply nodded, like she understood too well. Ron pulled into the driveway around 4, headlights casting long shapes across the fence. When he came in, he held up a small cardboard box like a game show prize. "Fresh stereo system," he announced. "Bluetooth, aux input, backup camera hookup. Even works with that app you keep forgetting you downloaded." "I never use the app," Marge muttered. "Exactly," he said, grinning. They stepped into the garage while Nina kept scanning. The Buick waited like a blank slate, freshly vacuumed but still marked by the history it had endured. Ron leaned across the driver's side and began wiring the stereo with clean, practiced moves. Marge watched from the passenger door. "You know," he said after a moment, "this thing might outlive both of us if we take care of it." "Good," she said. "Let it carry someone who remembers who bought it in the first place." Back inside, she sat down again at her table and pulled out a small notepad. The paper was stiff, the kind with faint blue lines and tiny checkboxes. At the top, she wrote, "People who get keys." She wrote one name, Nina. Below it, she added a second column, "People who don't." She didn't need to write Troy and Lindsay's names. She just drew a long black line. Her phone buzzed. Ron. Installed. Synced. Sounds cleaner than the truth. She laughed. For real this time? Then she tapped open her emergency contacts. Add new contact? Yes. Name, Nina Klein. Relationship, emergency contact. She clicked save. From the corner, Nina asked, "You keeping the albums?" "Some," Marge said. "I'm picking the ones where I still look like I belong." Nina nodded. "Good." Marge opened a drawer and pulled out an old keychain. The original one, red leather, cracked with age. She clipped one fresh copy of the Buick's key to it, then turned it over in her hand. The back read, "If found, return to owner." She smiled to herself. Finally, it had. Marge stared at the cursor blinking in the description box of her online listing. The rest was already filled in: a 2016 Buick LaCrosse, low mileage, clean title, one owner, excellent mechanical condition, minor cosmetic wear, heated seats, reliable in winter. She paused. Her fingers hovered for a second, then typed slowly, "Pet damage in rear seat, thoroughly cleaned, all receipts and records included, price to sell, but not to negotiate." She uploaded 4 clear photos, exterior, interior, trunk, dashboard. The car looked honest. Not showroom polished, but trustworthy, like something that had lived through real life and come out standing. As she clicked post listing, she felt it, that shift, like setting something down you didn't realize you'd been carrying. The first email came in 11 minutes later, then another, then 4 more by noon. By 2 o'clock, she'd scheduled 2 test drives for later in the week. She was halfway through replying to a message about the mileage when her phone lit up with a familiar number. Troy. She didn't answer. A minute later, the text appeared. "Troy. Is this a joke? You're selling the Buick?" She stared at it. No punctuation, no apology, just the assumption that he still had a say. She typed back 2 words. Marge, number, business. He didn't reply. That night she laid the paperwork out in 3 neat stacks, title copy, maintenance log, and a notarized copy of the sale agreement. She wouldn't need them all, but she wanted to be ready. Wednesday at 4:30, the garage door creaked open, letting in a rush of cold air with the first buyer. The woman was in scrubs, a worn North Face jacket zipped all the way to her chin, a backpack slung over one shoulder. Her name was Shannon, and her smile was tired but kind. "Sorry if I'm late," she said. "Shift ran long. It always does." "No worries," Marge said, handing her the key. "You can take it up to the corner and back. It's got a new stereo and snow tires. Seat warmers still work, though one's a little temperamental." Shannon laughed. "So am I." They both smiled. While Shannon drove, Marge walked the driveway twice, then stepped inside to warm her hands. She'd been nervous, not about the car, but about the exchange. Whether she'd flinch when someone else touched the thing that had once been used to shut her out. But when Shannon pulled back in, cheeks pink and eyes alert, Marge felt nothing but clarity. "It drives smooth," Shannon said. "Really smooth. I've been looking for something reliable. I'm a nurse over at Mercy Anderson, single mom, can't afford surprises." Marge nodded. "I get it." Shannon looked down, hesitant. I can't do full price today, not all of it, but if you're open to payments, I can do weekly, in person. No flaking. Marge studied her. There was no ask behind her words, no performance, just a woman balancing her world in both hands, hoping not to drop anything. She didn't need time to think. You show up on time, Marge said. The keys are yours. Shannon blinked. Really? Marge held out the key ring, the backup set, still attached to the cracked leather tag. Just business, she said again, but the kind that works for both people. Shannon took the keys slowly, not like a buyer, like someone handed a chance. That night, Marge sat at her kitchen table with a mug of chamomile and a pen in her hand. The garage was one car lighter. The Buick now had a new home, and she wasn't mourning it. She was proud of it. She opened a fresh page in her notepad. What I took back. She began to write, my name, my car, my place, my say, my warmth, my key. Her phone buzzed softly. Shannon, made it home safe. Thank you again. You didn't just sell me a car. You gave me a reset. Marge stared at the message, eyes stinging, then typed, Marge, you'll do right by it. Just promise me you'll keep the heat on, up front. Shannon, always. Marge leaned back in her chair, the silence now something else. Not empty, but earned. In the other room, the albums still waited. But the pages ahead? They were blank, ready. And this time, she'd decide where she sat in the frame. Marge sat in her living room with the afternoon sun filtering through the blinds, casting striped shadows on the rug like bars. Her phone sat on the coffee table, screen up, waiting. No dings, no calls, but she didn't mistake silence for peace, not yet. She picked up the phone, unlocked it, and tapped into her contacts. The names appeared instantly, Troy Klein, Lindsay Klein. She stared at them for a long moment, thumb hovering. There had been a time, decades ago, when she kept Troy's baby photos in her wallet. Now he lived in her phone like an overdue bill. She opened the settings. Block contact? Confirm? Yes. She did it for Troy. Then Lindsay. Then went to her email app and did the same. Done. Not angry, not impulsive, just necessary, like shutting a window during a storm. The doorbell rang just as she set the phone down. She opened the door to find Joe standing there with a pink thermos under one arm and a bag of scones in the other. I brought something illegally buttery, Joe said. And tea. You're not allowed to say no. Marge stepped aside. I just blocked my son. Perfect, Joe said, breezing in. Let's celebrate. They sat at the dining table, the same one Marge had used to host birthdays and frost cookies with a 5-year-old Troy. Now it held a single candle and 2 mismatched mugs. So how does it feel? Joe asked, pouring tea. Marge stirred hers slowly. Not like a victory. No? Like balance returning. Joe raised her mug. To earned equilibrium. Marge smiled and clinked her cup. It does feel earned. They sipped in silence for a few minutes. Outside, a bird scraped at the feeder, wings flapping sharp against the glass. Inside, the house felt warmer, not by temperature, but by clarity. Later that afternoon, Marge met Travis at the co-working office downtown, tucked between a dental lab and a tax prep center. His desk was cluttered with legal pads, binder clips, and a laminated map of Hamilton County dotted with sticky notes. I'm revising the estate, Marge said, sitting down and setting her folder on the desk. I figured, Travis replied, flipping open a fresh page in his notepad. You want to take them off everything? Everything, she said. No access, no control, no cleanup, and I want a clause. No financial claims or contact allowed, moving forward. He didn't blink, just nodded and started writing. Include Nina? He asked. She's the only one who's earned it. By the time she left, the revised plan was underway. The trust would stay in her name, with Nina added as co-successor. Everything else, accounts, assets, even the garage title, was moving into a fortress. One only she held the keys to. At home, Marge walked out to the driveway where Nina waited behind the wheel of her second car, a used Corolla with scratches on the side but solid bones. Seat okay? Marge asked, sliding into the passenger side. It's good. Nina said, tightening her ponytail. "You sure you don't want to drive?" "I do," Marge said, buckling her seatbelt, "but today's about you." Nina started the car. It sputtered once, then hummed to life. They practiced basic turns through the neighborhood, stopping at every sign, easing around corners like the road could vanish without notice. Marge gave gentle instructions. Hands at 10 and 2, ease into the brake, trust the wheel. "You're doing fine," she said after the third stop sign. "Just breathe." Nina grinned, cheeks flushed. "You know, Dad said he'd teach me to drive 2 years ago." Marge looked straight ahead. "He says a lot of things." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was mutual understanding. When they returned to the house, the garage opened like it had been waiting for them. Nina parked cleanly. Not perfect, but solid. "Better," Marge said. "Next time we try downtown." As they stepped out, her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number, voicemail received. She played it on speaker. Troy's voice filled the room. Clipped, defensive, panicked beneath the surface. "Mom, we need to talk. You're making this worse than it has to be. You're not thinking clearly, and Lindsay thinks maybe someone's influencing you. Just call me before this goes too far." Marge stared at the phone, then reached forward, thumb hovering again. "Delete voicemail?" "Yes." She didn't look at Nina. She didn't need to. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but inside, not a single draft remained. Marge sat across from Travis again, this time in a sunlit conference room instead of his usual paper-piled desk. The room was warmer, quieter, like even the air understood it was hosting something final. He tapped his pen on the signature page. "All right, beneficiary designations updated. You and Nina are now co-trustees on the primary accounts. Home, vehicle, pension, brokerage, everything flows through the trust now." Marge nodded. "And the clause?" Travis slid a second document toward her. "No contact. No claims. No legal standing. It won't stop them from trying, but it'll hold in probate." She signed it, and then again on the next line. "Anything else?" he asked. "Yes," she said, reaching into her purse. "I want to cash out the Connor Pharmaceuticals stock. All of it." Travis blinked. "That's a decent chunk of retirement padding." Marge tucked the pen back in her coat pocket. "I'm retired. That padding's been collecting dust. Time to do something with it." The women's shelter sat behind a grocery store on the east side, a plain brick building with cracked windows and a parking lot that never seemed empty. Marge handed the check to the woman behind the front desk, a tall figure in scrubs and snow boots, face lined by long shifts and longer stories. "This is real?" the woman asked, eyes wide. "It is," Marge said. "Use it for coats, or heat, or both." The woman stared at the amount, stunned. "Most people just drop off canned soup." Marge smiled gently. "I've had enough cold to know it's never just about soup." She left before they could ask her name. The mall was nearly empty, a Tuesday morning in the dead of winter, but Marge walked it with quiet purpose. She bypassed the trendy shops and headed for the department store near the anchor end. There, under too bright lighting, she tried on 4 winter coats, navy, charcoal, red. The 5th was the one, thick wool with deep pockets and a sturdy zipper that didn't stick. She added waterproof boots, lined gloves, and a scarf so soft it felt like apology. At checkout, she didn't flinch at the total. She paid in full, with her own card, from her own account, attached to her own name. Back home, the garage door was open, and Ron was kneeling next to the Corolla with a tire gauge. Nina stood nearby with her phone in one hand and a notebook in the other, eyebrows furrowed in concentration. Ron looked up as Marge approached. "We're doing fluids today, then battery terminals. She already knows the 3 main dashboard lights." "Check engine, oil, tire pressure," Nina recited. Marge smiled. "Better than Troy ever learned." Nina grinned and tapped the air horn for good measure. "It works, by the way." "Don't test me," Ron grumbled. Marge leaned against the garage frame and watched them. 2 different generations, passing down practical knowledge like a secret family recipe. No bravado, no performance, just real skill, real care. Inside, the house had taken on a new rhythm, cozier, quieter, more hers. She printed a photo that evening, the one Nina had taken last week after they returned from their first solo drive downtown. The two of them stood in front of the garage side by side, each holding up a set of keys. Not symbolic, just honest. She placed it in the silver frame that used to hold Troy's college graduation portrait and set it on the mantel. Then, she took the old photo down and slipped it into a drawer, not out of anger, just out of rotation. She was pouring water for tea when Nina appeared in the doorway. "Car's good to go," she said, shaking snow out of her hair. "Want to drive to the hardware store tomorrow?" Marge asked. "You mean I can?" Marge smiled. "Just check the oil first." Nina gave her a mock salute and disappeared down the hall. As the kettle began to sing, Marge walked over to the living room window, pulling the new coat around her tighter. Outside, everything was still blanketed in gray, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. Her phone buzzed once on the counter, a different sound. Bank alert, trust account activity, confirmation of beneficiary update. Under it, a second notification. Nina Klein has accepted shared account access. Marge turned toward the kitchen. She didn't need to say it aloud, but the truth was as solid as the keys in the frame. The future finally knew who it belonged to. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Marge recognized the DMV return address immediately. Pale blue window, printed barcode, no-nonsense government seal. She carried it into the kitchen, sliced it open with a butter knife, and slid out the single-page confirmation. At the top, bold font, "Vehicle transfer complete, liability cleared." She stared at it for a long moment before folding it carefully and slipping it into a clear sleeve. Then she opened the filing cabinet under the hallway table and added it to a growing folder labeled Finals, the last page in a chapter she'd once thought would always stay open. But there was one thing left to do. That afternoon, she sat at her computer, sipping lukewarm coffee and scrolling through the DMV's request portal. She selected Historical Owner Fines and Fees, Archived Plate Lookup, and typed in the old plate number from memory, a habit born of paying Troy's tickets before they ever reached his mailbox. 37 entries, 37. She blinked once, then hit Export Full Report PDF. Printer on. Pages loaded. It began to hum. Each page told a story in short, bureaucratic bursts. Failure to pay meter, $25, Clifton District. No front plate, $75, Kenwood Tow Lot. Camera violation, $130, Liberty Street and Race. Some were years old, others dated as recent as 3 months ago. None had ever been paid by Troy. The state had stopped sending reminders when they thought Marge was dead or too old to care. But they had one thing in common. Her name. Until now. She slipped each sheet into its own clear protector and clipped them into a 3-ring binder. Then she added a cover page. Outstanding Debts Incurred by Troy Klein, 2018 to 2024. Compiled and delivered by Marjorie E. Klein. Status: closed, but not forgotten. She sealed it all into a thick Tyvek envelope, slapped a certified mail label across the front, and addressed it to Troy Klein, 173 Whitestone Lane, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45233, no note, no return address, just records. Proof. Nina was sitting cross-legged on the floor when Marge passed through the living room, flipping through a workbook on parallel parking. "What sending?" Marge held up the envelope. "Some overdue homework." Nina grinned. "He's going to blow up." Marge shrugged. "He already did. I'm just mailing the ashes." They both laughed, and for a moment, the decades of manipulation and guilt felt as light as the snow drifting against the window glass. Later, in the garage, Ron crouched beside Marge's new key fob, headlamp strapped to his forehead, and a small screwdriver between his teeth. "You sure you want the panic button? These things are loud as hell." "Exactly," she said, loud and clear. He nodded and began working, threading the wires through the casing like he was performing surgery. The LED clicked to life. One press and the horn would blare, the lights would flash, and any illusions of politeness would vanish in an instant. "Test it," he said, handing it over. Marge stepped outside and hit the red button. The Buick's alarm screamed to life, sharp, decisive, unapologetic. She waited a full 2 seconds before disarming it. Perfect, she said. Back inside, she added the fob to her new keychain, not the cracked red leather one, a newer one, solid brass with her initials engraved and a small engraved tag. In case of emergency, I'm the one who decides. As she slid it into her coat pocket, the house phone rang. Unknown number. She didn't move. The machine picked up after 4 rings, her own voice playing calmly through the speaker. There was a pause, then a hang-up. She turned toward Nina, who was already watching from the kitchen. No message? Marge smiled faintly. Only the one I sent. Outside, the mailbox flag stood up straight, red and ready. Tomorrow, the envelope would be in transit. By the time Troy opened it, the contents would be undeniable. And Marge? She'd be somewhere warmer, keys in her hand, future intact. Next up, the final tow. The rumor made it to Marge before the snow melted. Apparently, Lindsay had been making the rounds, subtle, sugar-coated, perfectly calibrated for neighborhood porches and PTA groups. Not a smear campaign. Not exactly. Just concern. Oh, poor Marge. After the divorce, she never really bounced back. She's always been sensitive. Troy tried his best, you know. That whole car thing? Honestly, it was kind of erratic. Joe heard it first at the co-op and texted immediately. Marge, of course she did. Joe, you want me to say something? Marge, number. I'll say it myself. 2 days later, she stood at the lectern of the Roosevelt Community Room, the same one where Troy once won a merit award in 6th grade and Lindsay hosted a prenatal yoga info night in 2012. This time, it was Marge's voice that filled the space. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't angry. She just spoke. Clear, chronological, matter-of-fact, the kind of story you only get to tell once, and only if you've lived it. She laid out everything: the shared vehicle, legally still hers, the expenses, the avoidance, the paperwork she handled, the final tow, the sale. She even passed around a laminated handout titled, "When It's Time to Take the Keys Back, a Practical Guide to Reclaiming What's Yours." When she was done, the room was silent for a full breath. Then a woman in the back, someone Marge vaguely remembered from Tai Chi class, raised a styrofoam cup. To the one who walked away warm. Applause broke out like cracking ice, nothing theatrical, just steady, approving, dignified. Someone brought scones, someone else brought tea. By the end of the hour, the chairs had rearranged into a loose circle, and laughter had crept in from the edges. They called it brunch, but it felt like something closer to witness. That evening, as she was feeding stale bread to birds on her back porch, her phone rang. Unknown number. She didn't flinch. She picked it up, thumb ready, just in case. Troy's voice came through before she could block it. Not yelling, not angry, just tired. Mom, listen, I don't want to fight, okay? I just think maybe we can talk. I've had time to think. Maybe we all messed up, but it doesn't have to stay this way. Call me back? She tapped block number before the message even ended. Then she slid the phone into her pocket and went back to the breadcrumbs. The crows were waiting. Loud, black, clever. Survivors. She liked them. The next day, Marge walked down to the shelter off Elm and Roosevelt, where the front desk volunteer was sorting through donated toiletries. I brought this, she said, holding up her old bus pass, the one she used all last winter. Still has credit on it. The woman blinked. You sure? It got me where I needed to go, Marge said. Now maybe it can help someone else leave. She didn't wait for thanks, just dropped it in the tray labeled Transit Donations and headed back into the cold. At home, a voicemail waited from an unfamiliar number. Not Troy this time, a landline. She hit play and listened. Hi, this is Denise from the Ohio BMV. Just wanted to confirm the final outstanding citation linked to your previous plate was cleared this morning. Paid in full. Balance, 0. No further action required. Marge exhaled, slow and even. Not from shock. From completion. That night, she pulled out her file folders and opened the one labeled Resolved. She tucked the DMV printout inside, zipped it closed, and slid it onto the top shelf. Ron was in the garage, replacing the light over the workbench. Nina was inside, humming something in the kitchen while a pot boiled. The world didn't feel loud anymore, just hers. Marge poured herself a cup of tea and sat down at the window, the same one where she used to watch Troy's SUV pull away without her. Now she watched the street empty itself of snow, tire by tire, quiet, clean. She smiled. There were still 2 chapters left. But the revenge? That part was already history. And the legacy? Already in motion. The map was folded in half and marked with a purple Sharpie. Marge's route drawn in a clean arc from Cincinnati to a small liberal arts college nestled just outside Athens. Not far, just far enough to feel like momentum. The Corolla was packed with snacks, a first aid kit, and 2 thermoses of sweet tea. Nina had playlist duty. Marge had the wheel. The passenger seat was scattered with gum wrappers, an old Polaroid camera, and a pair of sunglasses too large for either of them. The heater hummed low. The air outside bit sharp, but inside the car, it was warm. Lived in. Forward-facing. "You sure this isn't too much driving for you?" Nina asked, adjusting the mirror even though she wasn't the one steering. Marge smirked. "This whole thing started with a driveway I wasn't allowed to park in. I'll be damned if I can't enjoy my own front seat." They laughed. Easy, unguarded. The road stretched wide and bare ahead of them, 2 lanes and a shoulder with nothing but wind-blown fields and half-buried mailboxes. They passed signs for cider mills, antique barns, and ice fishing tournaments. Neither of them had plans to attend. Midway through the drive, they pulled off onto a country road with a crooked sign that read, "Glenn's Grill, pie all day." Inside, it smelled like bacon and pancake batter and wood polish. A teenage waitress led them to a booth by the window where the vinyl seats stuck to their coats. Marge ordered a Denver omelet. Nina got waffles with chocolate chips and a side of sarcasm. They took photos, Marge holding her fork like a trophy, Nina pretending to spill syrup down her shirt. Somewhere between bites, they stopped for breath and found it. That quiet happiness that's not showy, not loud, but real. "So," Marge said, sipping her second coffee, "have you told him yet?" Nina raised an eyebrow. "Your dad? About the acceptance?" Nina shrugged. "I sent a copy of the letter to his inbox, with the subject line, 'Thought you should know. Haven't heard back.'" Marge didn't nod. She didn't need to. "He'll show up when it's convenient," Nina added more lightly, "but that won't be the important part anymore." They sat with that for a moment. Then Nina pulled out her phone and held up the screen. It showed a blurry photo of them both, taken just outside the gas station earlier, framed by a streaked windshield and a sun flare. Marge's hand was on the wheel. Nina was laughing. "You didn't just get the car back," Nina said. "You got you back." Marge blinked slowly. Not misty, just present. "I didn't lose me," she said. "I just let them borrow too much." They shared a quiet grin, the kind that didn't need history explained. The check came in a cracked plastic folder. Marge paid in cash, tucking a 5 beneath the plate for the girl who kept the coffee full. Back in the car, Nina clicked on the next playlist, classic rock, mostly female vocals. Marge rolled down the window a notch and let the cold sneak in, just enough to sharpen the contrast. Half an hour from the college, her phone buzzed in the console tray. "Ron, don't forget the oil change. Congrats to Nina." Marge held it up to show her. "He's thorough," Nina said. "He's steady," Marge replied, then added, "That matters." The campus came into view just past a line of pines, old stone buildings dusted with leftover snow, flags snapping in the breeze, students trudging with backpacks and earbuds and coffee cups the size of survival kits. Nina leaned forward. "Wow!" Marge slowed the car and pulled into the visitor lot. "You ready?" Nina glanced over. "Are you?" Marge smiled, not just with her mouth, but with something quieter, deeper. "I've been ready since the day I said no." They got out together, boots crunching on salted pavement. Marge locked the car with a single chirp, slid the key into her coat pocket, and let the wind hit her face full on. It didn't sting. It just meant she was moving. The folding chairs in the Roosevelt Community Center were already half filled when Marge arrived, bundled in her new coat with the brass key fob clipped to the zipper pull like punctuation. The same room where she once stood, reclaiming her story, now hummed with murmured conversation and the scent of lukewarm coffee in cardboard cups. She didn't need a podium, just a chair a table, and a voice. Nina stepped up first, clearing her throat. She wore a blazer too big in the shoulders, borrowed from the high school costume closet, but her posture was steady, her chin lifted. "This is my grandmother," Nina said. "She doesn't take the bus anymore." Scattered chuckles rolled through the room, but it wasn't a joke. It was an arrival. Marge stood slowly, hands folded in front of her. She let the silence settle before speaking, not to command it, but to respect it. "I'm not here to talk about cars," she said. "I'm here to talk about what happens when you give away something too slowly to notice. Space, money, time, dignity." A few women nodded. "I gave my keys to someone who treated them like a blank check, and I let it go on because it was easier, familiar, expected." She paused. "Not for effect. For breath. But here's what I've learned. Getting something back doesn't look like a movie. It looks like paperwork, notarized documents, oil changes, standing up in rooms like this one and saying, 'No, that's mine.'" She let the words hang. "I don't need applause. I needed traction. And now I've got it." The room exhaled. When she stepped down, they came in waves, women with stories carried in their shoulders. One handed Marge a thank you card, another asked for a copy of the pamphlet, a third just hugged her, wordless, shivering slightly but firm. "I saw my own daughter in that boy of yours," one woman whispered, "but I'm still driving her car." Marge squeezed her hand. "Not forever." Outside, the sun was slipping low, gold slanting across the parking lot in soft, forgiving streaks. The wind had calmed, the road home was quiet. At the house, she didn't turn on the lights right away. She moved through the dim calmly, like someone who knew the path by heart. She passed the living room, touched the corner of the frame on the mantel. The photo inside showed her and Nina holding keys. Side by side. No filters, no staging, just earned ease. Next to it sat a small wooden plaque, gift-wrapped and left on her porch the day after the community talk. On its surface, laser-etched in brushed silver, "She took back the wheel." Marge didn't cry, she didn't laugh. She just nodded and picked it up with both hands, setting it back down like it was made of truth. Upstairs, she opened the velvet-lined box Ron had given her for Christmas. Inside were her new keys, the brass fob, the one with her initials, the panic button, all of it resting on a deep plum cushion, quiet and strong. She closed the lid gently, clicked the latch, and placed it on the dresser like a declaration. In the hallway, she passed the old mirror, the one she used to avoid during winters that felt too long. This time she stopped. Her reflection didn't flinch. In the corner of the room, a photograph of her late husband remained, one of the few she never took down. He stood beside their old Chevy, back when it ran hot in the summer and the AC was a myth. His hand rested on the roof. Hers was on his arm. She looked up at it now. "You'd be proud," she said softly. Not for the spectacle, for the finish. Downstairs, Nina's voice drifted from the kitchen, something about needing more printer paper, something about her dorm room dimensions, real things, things ahead. Marge turned off the hallway light and walked down the stairs, every footstep her own. She paused at the door, coat in one hand, keys in the other, and then, with the calm certainty of a woman who'd left nothing unresolved, she smiled and said it out loud for no one but herself. "He gave his dog the seat. I gave myself the drive."